Now, the Gauteng High Court has ordered that all pregnant and lactating women, children under the age of 6, irrespective of nationality and documentation status, be provided access to free health services at all of South Africa's public health facilities, including hospitals. Now, this ruling does not include members or beneficiaries of medical aid schemes and those who have not come to South Africa for the specific purpose of obtaining health care. It follows a court application brought in May last year by Section 27, together with 2 women who were denied access to free health services while pregnant, and one whose child that was under 6 was denied free health services. Now, the court also found that policies, or all policies or circulars issued by the respondents, including the Gauteng Health Department, that needed those impacted to go through a classification and a fee determination process are inconsistent with the National Health Act. So to give us more information, we are joined by Sasha Stevenson, who is the head of Health Rights Program at Section 27. Sasha, thank you very, very much. It's good to have you on the program.
Good morning, thank you.
So the order follows a court application that was brought in May 2022 by yourself, Section 27, together with the 2 women who were denied access to this free health services while being pregnant, and the one whose child was under 6 and denied health services. Perhaps you can give us background to their circumstances.
Yes, well, Leanne, the circumstances that these women experienced mirror those experienced by many people across the country who struggle to get access to healthcare services, even when pregnant or lactating or under 6. And I think what's really important about this court order is that it is not creating law, it's requiring compliance with the law. So the National Health Act provides that this is a right of all pregnant and lactating women and children under the age of 6. But in practice, what's been happening is something quite different. So the court confirmed the law as it stands and required that the state comply with the law, and importantly, tell its officials that they need to comply with the law and make it clear through circulars and posters in health facilities what the rights of patients are and what the obligations on the state are.
Yeah. So just to understand the lady and the child under 6 years old, what were their circumstances living in South Africa? What were their sort of status?
They were asylum seekers or undocumented people. So at the moment, or before this order, South Africans, permanent residents, and sometimes refugees were able to access the services that they need. But this was not always the case for asylum seekers and undocumented people. It was also not always the case, frankly, for refugees or South Africans or people who don't have documents. And so that's why this case is really important, is that it says your nationality, your documentation status doesn't matter if you are pregnant, lactating, or under the age of 6.
Yeah. So before this, I mean, what I'm reading is that there was a 2020 policy, and it basically, as they say, and perhaps this was discussed in court, was fraught with internal contradictions, allowing hospitals to interpret its provisions to deny certain groups of pregnant women and young children free access to services. And this is according to your publication. Where were the loopholes? What actually was wrong with this policy?
Well, the policy, there was a policy, there were regulations, and there was a circular. So there are a lot of documents flying around, and these documents all said slightly different things in different places. So in some places it said, for example, that anyone who's not a citizen needs to apply, essentially needs to pay. In other places it specified that refugees are included within the same group as South Africans. So those were the internal contradictions that made it, frankly, very difficult for officials to interpret what they meant. It's difficult for officials to know exactly what their obligations are if these are not clear in policies and circulars. And so that's what this order is trying to do. I must say, though, that the case didn't go before a court for a hearing. What happened is that we brought the case along with our 3 clients last year, and the state responded by filing a notice of intention to oppose. So that's what usually happens when someone against whom a case is brought is indicating that they want to oppose and will put in their defense, essentially. And the state then failed to put in any papers to, in fact, oppose the application. So they said they wanted to, but then they didn't put in any papers. And the case was then taken to case management. And over the course of a number of meetings with the Deputy Judge President Sutherland and the attorneys and counsel on behalf of the state, we went through a process of determining what the next steps should be, and the state decided to withdraw its opposition to the case and for us to start discussing an agreed order. Now, we got quite far in discussing that agreed order. We were very close to being on the same page. The order that the judge eventually made was slightly different to the one that the state had opposed, but I think it's important to reflect that the state was prepared to agree to a substantially similar order to the one that the court ended up handing down. And so we're looking forward to implementation of this order, because this isn't something that the state in the end, in fact, fought.
Yeah. All right. So thanks for that understanding, because that gives us a lot more perspective into it. And I can imagine something like this is going to raise a lot of concerns, because one of the issues that are stated, and this is where it sort of gets a little bit blurry, I imagine, is that it has to be proved that, and anybody that's living in South Africa that is lactating and children under the age of 6 years old, but they must not have come to South Africa to seek medical care. Now, my question to you is, how do you know that? I mean, if somebody is in the country illegally, and one of the big problems is we do have very porous borders in South Africa, how are you able to prove that let's just put a hypothetical question, that there is a patient who is coming from, say, Zimbabwe, comes across into South Africa, pregnant at the time, and then says, I want to come to hospital and give birth in South Africa because the system perhaps works better than it does in Zimbabwe. How do you prove this now?
It's difficult to prove. So there are there's a visa that you can get to come to South Africa specifically for the purposes of accessing healthcare services. It is, of course, difficult to show whether you came to South Africa specifically for the purpose of accessing health services or not. But what we know is that there are a lot of people in South Africa, undocumented asylum seekers, refugees, who've been here for a very long time. They have made a life here in South Africa. And the idea that people are coming across the border just to access healthcare services is entirely without evidence. We just don't have that kind of evidence. It tends to be based on anecdote. And the South African Constitution says everyone has a right of access to healthcare services, including reproductive health services. And so that's really on the basis on which this order is founded, is that we have this right. It accords to everyone regardless of citizenship. We prioritize the interests and the rights of pregnant and lactating women and children for good human rights reasons, but also for good public health reasons. We're trying to decrease maternal and child mortality. And essentially this order says there are many people who are living in South Africa and who are being denied access to services. Yeah. And constitutionally and according to the National Health Act, they shouldn't be. And I mean, Sam, I know this is an emotional topic, and I know that Sasha, a lot of people are going to have differing views on that, no doubt, because, I mean, the argument, certainly, as you say, this is what the Constitution states. Everyone has a right to quality healthcare. But there are myths as well when we look at the healthcare system at the moment. It is taking strain. There are a lot of foreign patients who do come to South Africa and want to access the medical care system here in the country. The problem is that South African citizens with passports, IDs, and born here their whole lives are struggling to access the system because it seems to be crumbling. And that is a very, very big problem, is that there just does not seem to be the capacity to even address South Africans' needs, never mind foreigners that are coming into the country, never mind illegal foreigners. And I think that must be the very important aspect of the conversation, illegal foreigners. So what is your response to that? I mean, when we look at the healthcare system, adding even more to it, which is what is happening, how can we handle this? Leanne, I think you're completely right. The health system is under an inordinate amount of strain. We need to look, though, at the reasons for that strain. And the reason is often given that it's because there are people coming across the border in order to access healthcare services. What we don't know is how many people are coming across the border. We don't have that kind of evidence. The state has never put it up. There keep on being statements about how these things are going to be assessed. It never has been. So we don't actually have figures. The figures we do have are these. The vast majority of doctors and specialists in South Africa operate in the private sector, not the public sector. So the public sector is dramatically understaffed. And to add to this, there was this year a decrease of 5% in the healthcare budget. Now, the health system can't be said to be crumbling because there are people coming from outside of South Africa. The health system is under strain and in some places is crumbling because it is being systematically underfunded and defunded. And until we resolve the way that the health system is funded, the way that the health system is managed, the way that the health system is governed, we're not going to get a health system that can provide access to services for all. The problem here is not people from outside of South Africa. The problem is budget and management and governance of the system.
I mean, if we look back at, we remember very clearly the incident of the MEC, the health MEC in Limpopo, Dr. Poppy Ramatuba. I mean, I'm sure you know that one very, very well, where we saw this video recording of her actually speaking to a lady who was lying in bed getting medical care, saying it's because of people like you that South Africans can't get the medical care because you are putting too much strain. So could we say, I mean, I forget the circumstances of what the patient actually was, if she was pregnant and if she was illegal or whatever the case may be, but an incident like that, would now that be seen as criminal?
It's not criminal, but it's unlawful. It would be contrary to the National Health Act as provided for in this order. So certainly that incident, it was unlawful at the time because, as I say, there was the law in the National Health Act hasn't changed. The policies were the problem, and the implementation of the law was the problem. So it would have been not only contrary to the National Health Act at the time, not only a violation of the dignity of the woman who was subjected to this appalling treatment by the MEC of a province in front of healthcare workers and on camera, but it also would have been contrary to and a violation of this court order. That's the kind of treatment that many people are receiving in health facilities across the country. And it goes against what we as South Africans say we stand for in terms of our constitution, and certainly against the rights of people who are living in South Africa and with whose care we're concerned.
I mean, I hear 100% of what you're saying. I mean, I'm, currently somebody that I know very, very well is going through a very similar situation where they cannot even access their own health records and tests from things that they've done over a month ago. And this is at Helen Joseph, and the doctor's refusing to speak to them, just saying they're too busy, they can't give them the time. And this is, these are real stories affecting people that are in desperate need of healthcare. But let's just round this off, because just one or two things that now have come out of this is that the Department of Health has been ordered to direct the preparation and display of posters or notices and in all health establishments that reflect the amendments in the provinces by no later than the 17th of July. So I can imagine how health workers are feeling. They're already overburdened, and it is something that they now need to be very sensitized to, on how they should treat all pregnant women and lactating women and children under the age of 6. So how is this going to happen?
You're right. It is something that health workers need to be sensitized to. We're working with our partners, in our health activist partners, in the Treatment Action Campaign and elsewhere, to speak to both patients and health workers about what this means. And what their obligations are. I think it is, any possibility of more work on a healthcare worker is a big call, because they are currently overworked and undercapacitated, and we do need to focus all of our energies on improving the budget for health, improving, importantly, how that budget is spent, because we know about all of the corruption scandals in health. Health is particularly vulnerable to corruption. So we need to both sensitize health workers, and I think as health activists, civil society, healthcare users, and health workers work together to advocate for increased budgets and better use of budgets in the health system around the country.
Yeah, indeed. Just proper clarity, and one last question to you. So if somebody today is pregnant but they are in South Africa illegally, they can go to any hospital in the public sector and receive free treatment. That is now what has been passed. So that is the reality.
That's right, as long as they are not members of or dependents on medical aid, or came to South Africa specifically for the purpose of accessing healthcare services.
All right, Sasha, thank you. Thanks very, very much for your time. Sasha Stevenson is the head of Health Rights Program at Section 27, talking to us about what has just happened with regard to the Gauteng High Court ruling, which has now given rights to all pregnant and lactating women, children under the age of 6, irrespective of nationality and documentation status, to be provided access to free health services at all South African public health facilities, including hospitals.